Thank you for joining me for another episode of Awaken Empowered TV. I'm your host, Ethan Fox. Today I'm joined by Werner Brandmaier, and we speak about the field of Feng Shui and Geopathology and how he has used that to help individuals to live happier, healthier lives. A lot of very interesting stories. We also get into how geopathic stress affects the human body and how different animals and insects and plants and trees and so on respond to geopathic stress in very unique ways. Werner is going to be speaking at our upcoming Awaken Empowered Expo in November of 2017. You can buy tickets at awakenempoweredexpo.com, so hopefully you can join us for that. And also, Werner's in my Lightworker program, which is a program where I help a handful of individuals to develop their talents and to get out into the world where they can really take their gifts out in a global way to reach a global audience. I'll be having him back on the show again in the future to talk more in depth about some of these new fields of research that he's getting into. Today is just to build a little bit of foundation about his background and the field of work that he's been working in up until this time. But the really interesting stuff is going to be coming in the future. So join us again for that. And of course, if you're interested in the Lightworker program, you can just go to ethanfox.com and click on the Lightwork tab and sign up for that there. And then we can set up a time to talk where we can discuss how we could work together so that you can discover your life mission and take that out into the world in a very global way so you can make the biggest impact with why you came here. So I look forward to working with you and helping you to do that. In the future shows, you're going to see many other of my individuals in the Lightworker program come out into the world, including Michaela Sheldon, who you're all quite familiar with, I'm sure by now, who's very successful as an intuitive channel, and she's on my show on a regular basis as well. So look forward to that, and without any further delay, I'd like to bring on my special guest, Werner Brandmaier. Hi, Werner. Welcome to Awaken Empowered TV. It's nice for me to have you on the show today and to spend the next couple of hours learning more about you and sharing with our audience some of your areas of expertise. So welcome to the show. And where are you joining us from today?
Thanks, Ethan. Nice to have me on your show. I'm on the East Coast in Portland, Maine, beautiful Portland, Maine. At this time of the year, right? So summer is here finally.
That's great. That's great. Well, let's start by talking about you and your background for people who are unfamiliar with your work. In particular, I'd like to know more about your childhood journey and how that led you to the work that you're doing now, and we'll get more into what that work is in a later conversation.
Sure. I grew up, obviously not here in the US, in Austria, in Europe. I grew up in a small town, rural environment community, and at a time when natural methods were widely used still. So I remember when I was little, any little ouchie you had, your grandmother brewed something in her kitchen with some herbs and to fix that. Or my dad always had pots around the house with plants which were in the sun to distill the essence, and then he mixed his little homeopathics himself at a very, very early age, as far back as I remember, really. My father, also not being a doctor himself, was very interested in these new health fields like homeopathy or iris diagnosis. I remember, he had a big looking glass. He looked into people's eyes and found all kind of illnesses in there. Most impressed, I must say, I always was when he was called to douse for water. Dowsing is a method where you use some tools or sticks, sometimes L rods, specific devices to walk on the earth and find what's under the earth, what's beneath the earth. And most common is to find water for a good water source for a well. So he used branches from trees and walked the ground, and magically at some point this a Y rod, it was called, like in a triangle, started to whip around. And that was the spot where the water was. And it took me for a number of years before I thought it was pretty strange, before I recognized it as an ability he had, because people were happy with the results. And I tried it a bit myself, but it didn't, really work that much for me. So I forgot about it. And when I got into my mid-20s at college, I got interested again myself in all kind of bioenergy and health fields and meditation, and what you do to find yourself at that time in a life. And I tried dowsing again, and I found different tools which worked suddenly fantastic for me. The tool which I like best is a one-hand instrument. It's called a tensor. In fact, I grabbed one before in order to show it. So it's a one-hand device you just hold in one hand, and the end tips in different directions, up and down, sideways, in circles. So you can use that. And really what you do is you tune into an energy field. And everybody can do that, I believe. It takes a bit of practice. And so I played with that and loved it. And, it got me on my journey towards energy fields in nature and in your house, and to investigate those, which is pretty common in Austria, I must say. So people are much more aware that there are energy fields in the house which might be beneficial or not beneficial for your health. And so that was not something that special, but I just grew up around that, and that was the natural way to get exposed and then to take it on. And if I look back now, I must say, if my father did that, my grandmother, so on his side, his mother's side, so I have several generations go down to deal with that. On my mother's side, my mother is from Germany, so I'm half German, half Austrian, to be exact. My mother's side came from a rational thinking background or ancestry. My grandfather was a pretty famous mining engineer at the beginning of last century, and was world renowned, had several patents in his field. So teachers and engineers on my mother's side, and more the natural healers and dowsers on my father's side, which decided a bit my life path myself, because at some point, in Europe, it is not so much your own decision as the decision of your family where you should go, if you should step into the footpath of your father and become a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. But my family decided to get a proper education. I should become an engineer. I was pretty good in math and science. And so that's what I did. I am an engineer for electronics. Later worked in the medical field as an engineer with high-tech medical equipment for many years. MRIs, big machines, X-ray machines, radiotherapy, computer tomographs, all this type of, because I always had this pull towards the health field. So on my private time, I studied Chinese medicine, and later on, was pulled into the energy of your living space. And in Chinese, this is the field of Feng Shui. So Feng Shui is a big part of my life. And in the middle of my life, I married an American woman, and we lived in Austria for 10 years. And after 10 years, she had enough of Austria. And we moved back to the US. So on her way back, for me, it was a very big jump, because Europeans don't take these type of changes easy. or easily. So we moved to America, and at some point I considered staying with my company. My company was an international company. They had some places in the US, but not here on the East Coast, on the North and East Coast, where we liked it best because it was most European, and it was closer to travel back and forth. So we liked that. And it brought us to a different path in our lives in several ways. On one hand, I learned slowly, but I did, an American quality that you should do what you love to do, and not just struggle along into and meet your ends and make the money you need to live. And I always was pulled into, let's say, alternative health and energy around that and how to support that. And so I founded the Institute of Feng Shui and Geo Pathology in 99 or beginning of 2000. And we just went through, on the private side, through a very difficult time at this time, because we had just moved from the US, from Europe to the US. Our third child was on its way. And 2 weeks after the delivery, my wife was diagnosed with cancer. As you can imagine, this hit us pretty hard and very unexpected in many ways. We had lived a pretty healthy lifestyle to start with. We ate organic and didn't have too much junk food in retrospect. But life always has different ideas, I guess. And so it made me really look at this old European research about cancer and earth energy fields, or geopathic stress. And that was my personal intro, which pulled me in very directly into focusing on that. And then I realized that there is none, or at this time there was non-information, practically no information in English or in the US about all that. As much as this was, commonly well known in Europe. And so I thought spreading this information and connecting it with other branches of alternative health would be beneficial for many people. And I love to work with that, study that, share my information. So this is how the Institute came into life. On the personal side, my wife is healthier than ever today. At that point, we went through all the scary steps. The doctors scare you. She did some chemotherapy, to be clear on that, which we would handle the situation very differently what we know now. But at the time, we did parallel Chinese medicine, and the doctors really did not approve of that. So we did it secretly, just to keep the side effects of the chemo under control. And again, looking back, it might not even make that much sense, because those two methods work against each other. What we understand now. So anyway, we just thought we tried both ways at the same time, but it ended up finally well for us at the end, and we learned very, very, very much on the way. So this is where I am today, and today I talk about how important it is to have your house clear of geopathic stress, and to deal with energies around you. And this expands much further than at the end than just on health terms. But health is always one of the most important, or maybe the most important aspect, because if your health is off, nothing else works well, right? So it's just how it is.
I find it very interesting that a lot of people who follow these kinds of paths, or really anything in their life, they seem to be influenced by their parental or their lineage in some way. A lot of parents go to great lengths to teach their kids certain things, but it seems like their children are somehow genetically predisposed to doing similar things to what their parents were doing anyway. So why do you think that is? Do you think there's something being transferred vibrationally or genetically between your parents,
Yeah,
grandparents?
uh, I believe so. It's genetically, but not even physically genetically, energetic genetically. So you have the energetic imprint of your ancestry with you and in you, and you pass this on. And so whatever happened many generations up just naturally came down towards you. And I have 3 kids now, 2 boys and a girl. And the girl is the one which is mostly interested. She's very sensitive. She picks up all my work and experiments with my tools and devices and tells me new things she found when she visits, because now they're grown up and they come and visit once in a while, right? So but I believe, when you look at the DNA, they obviously deciphered the DNA officially. But when you look at the details, they deciphered, I believe, 3% of it, right? And the rest they call junk DNA. I really do not believe that nature deals with any junk, so everything is on very specific purpose. If you really go more into the details, you find out that there is not much physical matter really involved in our beings. It's all vibrational, and therefore it would make total sense that this information is passed on vibrationally. Yes, I believe that there is a lineage of that, and an interest, and maybe a pull, even when you're born and you select your parents, which I believe you do at some point energetically again, that you look for a similar energy pattern in your parents, which would help to bring out your own qualities and interests. And sometimes it takes to the middle of a person's life, right? So that's what the midlife crisis is for. And then people leave their jobs, well-paid jobs as CEO or in financial markets, and do something very different from their own.
Well, do you think that along those lines, do you think that we also, other than carrying just the predispositions genetically from our lineage, do we also carry some kind of a lineage of their life experiences, even their traumas and challenges?
Absolutely.
Do those become
Absolutely.
ours as well?
Of course, absolutely. And all that is imprinted in other parts of the DNA. Absolutely, yes. And this is why all these clearers do great work, energy clearers, to get those imprints out of your system, because they stick around. When you see the energy body of a person, when maybe it's a baby, it's pretty nice and clean, and when you're an old person, they have all these bumps and spots on there, like an old car, which was driven around for a long time. And the more you keep of those, you will even take them into your next existence, into your next life. And so the more you clear off, the better you come out next time. So that's what all this work goes to. And I very much love that, appreciate that, did a lot of it, and have a lot of friends in these worlds. And this is somehow how I met you and your TV channel and the people you interview. And
Well, let's talk about the core of your work, geopathology and feng shui. Can you describe for people? I mean, I'm sure most people are familiar with the latter, but can you give us an idea of what geopathology is, what it entails, and typically what you do in that work?
Yeah, sure. Geopathology is a German term. Geo, like in geography, the earth; pathology, sickness. So sick energy fields from the earth, and people always think everything is great in nature, but there are both polarities in nature, and not everything which is created there is necessarily healthy to eat or to live on, right? So there are areas in nature where trees grow really crippled, and you see that they have a hard time to even survive, and other areas where everything sprouts like crazy and blossoms. And so in old times, people were aware of that, and they followed this signs of nature and signals, and we lost that. And, as soon as you build a house, you cut off a big chunk of the energy of a place. So originally, what you should do if you look for a good place to build a house, so you walk the land and you find a spot which feels really good, right? And you can do that by just sitting down on different spots, maybe even in different orientations and directions, and just have a little meditation and feel how the land talks to you and how it feels. And then you start to build a house if you are lucky enough to own the place or a bigger place where you have some choices. And as soon as you put walls and the roof on there, you cut off already a big chunk of the energy of the space there, and then you put a roof on and you put windows in, and so you reduce this quite a bit. The quality of a good architect is, number one, that he's able to adjust a living house with the landscape, and just put it in there so it's not standing out like a sore something, but with the materials he uses, but also to choose, for example, the size of the openings, the door, where to put the door, the size of the windows. It's not always best to have just all windows around. That is not good for the qi. The qi, from the Japanese Feng Shui, and I mix things up here a little bit, I see both Feng Shui and Geopathology and the European tradition of geomancy. This is all about the same topic, right? It's all about creating harmonious, good, supportive energy where we live, and as long as it's supportive, we do well there. And sometimes maybe there are parts of the house which do not decorate, or things change, or a crack opens up under the ground because you live in California next to a canyon, and things change, and suddenly you don't feel that well in the house anymore. But geopathology covers the negative aspect of it in order to be able to find those spots and avoid them, and there are different ways to deal with them there. But I just wanted to finish the thought before of building a house. So when people put like all glass around the house, right? The qi enters the house through the door and then should ideally meander through the house nicely and then go out through the windows, right? So if you have huge windows around the entire house, the qi is not staying in the house, it immediately leaves the house, and that's not too great either. The meandering around, this is what a lot of people in the US or in the West understand of Feng Shui. They think Feng Shui has just to do with how to position your furniture in a room or in a house in order to make this meandering happen. But that's just a small part of it. The real important part is to figure out where the qi is outside, to lead it into the house, and then keep a good quality of qi as well. So as you can imagine now, if you live downstairs, in the basement. There's much less Qi reaching the basement, and the windows are much smaller there, or even the door. So until the energy comes from the upper floors into the basement and then goes around there, you only work with very, very little energy left. And then people complain that, they don't feel great in the house. There is not much energy there. Because all this has to be considered and looked at and put together properly. This is why a dungeon doesn't have much Qi, and people suffer down there. And the top of the tower, people look over the world and feel like kings. So in the old European tradition of castles. I love castles, I have to tell you.
I've heard you talk about how in the old days that they used to observe where animals like sheep would sleep, and that's where they would build a home. Can you talk about that? Why are they drawn to that?
Yeah, so this is part of the natural observations of nature, right? So what did people do in old times when they tried to build a house? Okay, they looked for a spot, but they looked around. They looked. Are there any crippled trees, or are the trees growing well and huge, beautiful trees? What are the animals doing? So somebody just told me yesterday. I got a call from, I don't remember, middle of the country somewhere, and it turned out the woman's was German, so her parents were German, and she said, "Yeah, I remember. They always told me where the cows lie down. This is where you want to build a house, right?" And so this was more common folk knowledge, I want to say, in Europe. I really heard this from the side of sheep, where a flock of sheep would lie down, but it's the same. All the bigger animals love the good spot and avoid the negative spots. And so to some degree, the animals can be your instrument to find out where is a good spot in the house and where not, because there's one exception rule of all that. So all the larger animals, like farm animals and dogs, for example, if you just think of pets, lie down on good spot. So all the spots they love are good spots. The only animal which is different from there are cats. Cats are attracted, interestingly, to geopathic stress, and where a cat lies down is usually a sign that something is wrong at the spot or not that great. The cat itself is not bothered by that or affected by it, and maybe they just lick it off, as their practice when they clean themselves, but they're not affected by it. Other animals are as well. So if your dog gets cancer, it's because maybe as pets, they lose a little bit the natural instincts, and maybe their bed was put in a spot which was not too great for them, and they did not have enough of their natural instinct strength to just deny the spot and move away, which happens often. So there are funny stories about all those written in old German books of medical doctors who researched that. So I have many stories on that. Just maybe as an additional interesting note, insects like geopathic stress as well. A lot of insects. So anthills are always on geopathic stress. If you have a big anthill, it's very often on a crossing of some water line maybe, or a grid line and a water line together. If you have ants in the house, it just is often a sign that there is a geopathic grid entering your house at some point, and this is where the ants come in. And you get a terminator every year, and they spray their toxins around the house, and every next season when the new ants generations spread out, they just follow these paths of earth lines, and they find your house again. We had, many cases where we shield the house, we get all geopathic stress neutralized in a house, and ants move out of the house, even carpenter ants, which once they stick in a house, they usually stay in there. And I had cases where they moved out of the house, and it's not because we do magic. It's just you don't provide an important energy for them, and so they look for it somewhere else if they have options. So that is interesting. Bees, wasps, if you have a wasp nest under your roof on one part of the house, and it again and again, no matter what you do, typical signs of geopathic stress. Also, a lot of bee people, I don't know what the English word for it, beekeepers is, Imker in German, know how to dowse, because bees give more honey if you put the hive on an underground water stream, for example. And to go the next step there, because we talked about health in general a little bit before and the interest in that. I always thought it was interesting that bee products, pollen products, are healthy for many things. And even there was quite an excitement for a while, and those waves come and go about using them for cancer, right? And my idea then was, or my thought was, if bees love geopathic stress and this energy there, and I guess this is maybe imprinted into their honey to some degree, the honey becomes a homeopathic remedy. And in homeopathy, there is the similar principle, which means you treat an issue with sometimes a toxin or something of the same quality, just with a very high dilution, with a very, very small amount. And so maybe the honey works as a homeopathic remedy to counteract geopathic stress in a person, and therefore is even more beneficial just than the properties of the honey itself. Maybe I should also explain what causes, or what we find, what causes geopathic stress. What we're looking at when we look at a house. Because what I do is, when I come to a house, I use my dowsing instrument and I walk around through the house and I scan the place. So I practically manually create a pattern, a scan of the floor plan, or on top of the floor plan, to see if we find some of those patterns in the house and where they are, and then how they affect you. Because as you realize, geopathic stress is everywhere in nature, and it has a very important function. So it's not, nature creates something to harm us. Everything has a reason there. And the function of geopathic stress is that it accelerates the deterioration of nature, right? So if something is rotting, it rots several times faster if this happens on geopathic stress. So if you have a compost pile in the garden, you want to put this on a geopathic stress cross, and it works 3 times faster. So it's part of nature that energy is created and supports you, and then it's drawn away when something dies, and then dust goes to dust and new life can start. So it's part of the life cycle, and a very essential part, because you just can't always have more energy, more. Everybody thinks, oh, we need more chi, more chi, more chi. It's not, and you explode. It's not working like that. So you need to fulfill the cycle somehow. But on the other hand, you don't want to expose yourself to something which drains you. And that's what really happens. It drains you. So it's not necessarily giving you cancer. What people thought in the 1920s and 30s when they picked up on that in Europe research, a lot of medical doctors involved in those early times. They thought they found the cause for cancer, and they presented this at medical conferences with the idea that, if we can reduce this in our lives or in the appearances, then cancer could be maybe counteracted or fought better. They found houses at this research. That what they did in these times is that they doused whole small towns in Germany, right? So there's a famous case of a dowser, Friedrich Freiherr von Pohl, who doused a small German village, Wilsbiburg, a few thousand people living there. And it took him a week, so he draw the pattern, around the village. And afterwards, they called in the mayor, called in the doctor of the, they had a conference, and he presented his results, and he called the doctor in and said, "Doctor, bring me from your archives the cancer cases of the last 15 years. And they found 42 cases in this town, and they looked at them, and every single case was on one of those major fault lines and geopathic stress lines or zones or areas. And so they thought, there is a correlation there. And so they did more research on that. And this is when they got really excited. They found houses. In Europe, you have often apartment houses, especially after the war. There's not everybody has their own house. And so there are more people living in a house. And so they found houses where they had like 10 cases of cancer over the last years. And the house next had none. Why is that? What's different from one house to the other one? And so this is, what led to the idea. Today, I would say we know that there are more influences that on a person that cancer would come up. And medicine gives us new explanations every few years, and maybe now it's genetic, or I understood that to blame it on the genes is already over. So I think what happens is that several influences have to come together, and the genetic one, might be a realistic one, but I don't think you have a cancer gene. I think you have a weakness, so there is a weakness there. But as long as the weakness is not further accelerated or brought up, there is no reason why it has to turn into cancer itself. So if you keep a good lifestyle and keep your energy around you well, then this should not be an issue. So there are several components which come together. One of them is, of course, food. If you have junk food and a lot of sugar and alcohol and nicotine and coffee all at the same time in accelerated amounts, that just wears your system down. And if you sleep on a geopathic stress zone, that is another important component, because honestly, what I found and what those people say, those medical researchers over the last 80 years say, that maybe not everybody who has cancer, but a high percentage. I would say in my case, it is really 90+%. But I'm often called to places where, there is a health issue. And even I don't know that, but, while we talk and what we find, and then I present my findings in the bedroom, and then people say, "Oh my God, there's a line crossing over my chest." And I was diagnosed with breast cancer 3 years ago, and whatever. So I think my percentage might be a bit higher, but even conservative estimates say 75% of serious illness always has a geopathic component with it. And this is what makes me passionate about that, because it is so important to address that. If this is not addressed, what happens is now you get a treatment, be it conventional or alternative or whatever, but your whole system takes a big dive in terms of the energy levels, because if you do chemotherapy or radiation therapy, it totally throws your little energy you have left under the bus, right? And it's really hard to build this back up. And so you change your food and you get like massages and energy treatments and Reiki and you meditate and you do all the good things and you barely get better, or 2 years later the cancer is back. And why is that? Because the biggest fear of somebody who had cancer is that it will show up again, and it will come back. And so it is so essential to understand that we need to look at the entire picture around us and then cut out as much as we can. Nobody is perfect. Nobody has to be a saint. I have my cappuccinos once in a while because I love them, and I put 3 sugars in there because otherwise I don't like them. But I do other good stuff, and so I see health as a little while ago I came up with this idea as an energetic bank account. This is what health really is. So it's like a piggy bank, if you want to say so, and you're born with a specific amount of money. In Chinese medicine, it's called Jing, not Qi, Jing. So the essential energy you bring with you, or constitution, so some people have a strong constitution, they have a lot of money in their piggy bank, and they can buy all kind of lifestyle choices, and others cannot. But at some point when you turn older, your piggy bank empties out, and at some point there's not much money found, and because we have credit cards now, so we run to the doctor and get some medication for high blood pressure or for back pain or whatever, and allergies, and so which buys us some more time, and so we can spend some more money, but usually, it doesn't improve the situation really. It just buys us more time, and at some point, it just is suppressed. The problem is suppressed deeper into the system, and then at some point it erupts, and then we get a bankruptcy note, right? You have cancer. And so what geopathic stress is in this picture now, because now if we do good stuff, we have organic food, we don't use a microwave, of course, I don't know if we talk about that at some point. We slowly start to refill the piggy bank. But geopathic stress is a crack in your bank, and you fill in good energy more, but you don't understand why whenever you look back in, it's pretty empty again, because it just seeps out through those cracks. And so the first thing we need to do to check, if there are any cracks, and if there are any cracks, we need to deal with them and seal them up. And then we need to do the good work, and when we bring all this together, and then hopefully this should give us the results we desire. So it's very logical and practical, so if, and it has to be simple. I always think truth has to be simple. If it becomes too complicated, so it needs to be logical, understood and to be dealt with common sense. And I think that is a simple picture which makes hopefully sense.
Now, in the case of your wife who had cancer, what did you conclude? I know you said you did conventional treatment as well, but did you conclude in the end that it was a geopathic stress issue?
It was a combination. So, to some degree, she had a weakness in her family. At this point, as much as you know about geopathic stress, or about, in German it's called earth rays, Erdstrahlen, in common knowledge, as long as it doesn't affect you really, it's something like everybody knows that Coca-Cola is not healthy to drink, right? And that they clean up the streets with it, but you still like a Coke, and so I guess there was a coming together of different aspects, and we lived in different places in Austria. This happened when we moved to America, right? So there might have been a karmic aspect with it as well, because it brought us in a very different direction in our life. And our Chinese doctor, which, it's the stories never end, right? So in Portland here, which is a tiny little town on the East Coast, not Portland, Oregon, Portland, Maine, we hear about at the time, right? We hear about a Chinese doctor who practices Chinese medicine here. She's an old lady, so Dr. May. So we find her finally, and it turns out that she is a originally trained medical doctor, but when she was pretty old when she moved out of China and came to America, and she didn't want to redo her medical studies, so she practiced Chinese medicine and acupuncture, massage, and herbology, and those things, but she didn't practice Western medicine. But when she got out of China first, she stayed in Vienna for 3 weeks, and her son for 3 years, and her son is still there. One of her sons is still there, and she was invited in a cancer program because this was her specialty in medicine. Because it was a research position, so obviously there were different laws about that. And she worked in the same general hospital, the biggest hospital in Vienna, that I worked for 10 years, right? Like 5 or 6 years before we came. So she worked there. So we must have worked in the same hospital at the same time. And then we meet up here in the US again. And so she worked with herbs and massage and made sure, every time you get a round of chemotherapy, which was very hard on my wife. She was so sick. She felt so sick. So this is why we never would do this again. But, I don't want to step on anybody's leg here, foot here. This is a very important decision which has to be made by yourself if you are in the city, because it's a life and death situation, right? The situation that, or the blame that Western medicine gives to alternative methods always is not really fair, because when you look at statistics, it doesn't look that good for Western medicine at all, right? But if one person dies on an alternative treatment, the world breaks down and breaks apart. So, but so we tried to work both ways. And interestingly, what happened was, on one hand, with the herbs, the Chinese doctor gave my wife, she didn't lose her hair, right? She should have lost all her hair within a few weeks. And the people in the hospital did not understand what was going on. The nurses, when she got her treatment, right? This was stretching over half a year. Every, 2 weeks, she got another round of chemo, and then she was really sick, and her white blood cells goes down, or, and then she gets other medications. So we use Chinese medicine to pump up the blood cell count, and so we mixed things up a little bit. But nobody ever asked us what we were doing, because they just saw something was different, but nobody ever asked us. And there is another crazy story on that, because this was my special field, the work with radiotherapy devices, right, with big machines. And what happens at this time to find out where the cancer is, you often get a radioactive substance. You take in, and then so you have a radioactive camera. It's called a gamma camera, which is able to detect this in your body, and these different substances are made in a way that they accumulate in the cancer itself, in the tumors. And so when you look onto the body, then you see where the cancer tumors are in the body. And in her case, it was lymphoma. So it's all around, all over the body. And of course, they scared the S out of us. They said, "Oh, you have a 2-week-old baby and 2 other little kids, and are you crazy? And we know how to treat that, and this and that." And by the way, we just had left a healthcare system which took totally care of anything like that. Doesn't ask any questions. You just treat it. And here we ran into all those other issues, that we didn't have insurance and so on. But what happened was, because I these were my devices, or I knew about so we used an isotope. It's called an isotope if you use a specific radioactive substance with an additional particle in there or not. So, they have a little bit different properties. So we used something which had a half-time. A half-time on a radioactive substance is something where the radioactivity goes after a specific time to half the intensity, right? So if you have a half-time of 3 hours, you have after 3 hours, it's half as intense. After 6 hours, it's a quarter, and so on. It just always, it goes down pretty quickly exponentially, right? But they used a similar isotope here, which had a half-time of a week or 2 weeks, right? So after 2 weeks, it was half down. After another 2 weeks, it was a quarter, So it was much, much longer stretched. And so she was practically glowing like a Christmas tree internally, right? So what happened was, because we pushed the doctors wanted to start treatment tomorrow, and we pushed it back for a little bit. So the first weeks are really important for the baby to be breastfed, to get all the immune system started up, right, through the breast milk. And so we pushed this back for another week or two before we started the treatment. And so then we asked the doctor, after 2 or 3 weeks, she said, so what do you think? Can I start breastfeeding again? And the doctor said, yeah, sure, maybe wait another week and then you can breastfeed again. And so in the meantime, she pumped her breast milk off, And so we brought in at some point after, several weeks after the treatment, we brought in breast milk of her, which was, I'm not lying, fluorescent green to the nurse, when to the next treatment. And she said, what is that? Can you explain to us what this is? You want me to feed this to my child? And the nurse got shelled up and ran out to ask the doctors and practically did not come back with an answer. And again, this is nothing to do with bashing the medical department here at all. They do fantastic work and they do great work. Maybe in specific areas, but in long-term chronic issues, that was I always found before, and what I was really interested was that Chinese medicine was made more sense to me, the approach of Chinese medicine, instead of doing the drug, radiation, surgery. These are the three options of Western medicine. And I just, I don't even know how we got here now, but this is just part of our story and what put us in our way. We then later on bought a quantum biofeedback computer, because we were interested to measure the very subtle energy fields of a person. And she got trained on that and still uses this today as part of her work. And it just got us in a, and I just started my geopathic and energy work because I saw the aspects from people's homes and did not really look back much on my old technical career and my life before that. So I don't remember what your question was, where we are now. Anyway, lost.
That's okay. I think you pretty much covered it. Well, now you've mentioned before how people tend to wake up at 3 a.m. A lot of people wake up at 3 a.m. because of whatever reason, and most people don't know why they do that. Can you explain why that is?
Yeah, that is a very good point. When we talked earlier about how animals respond and insects respond, and for geopathic stress, immediate first idea how the chi in your house is, and if it's good chi in your bedroom or if it's drained, is if you think about how you sleep. So if you sleep well and not just fall into a deep coma, because that is a little bit of a specific. Some people tell me, I go to my bedroom and I'm out, right? But then I can't get out in the morning because I'm so knocked out it means there's just a big energetic hole there where you fall into. The idea of good sleep is that you should be refreshed in the morning. If you get the minimum amount of 6, 7, maybe 8 hours, then you should be recharged. And if you don't sleep well, or if you wake up at night, that is often one of the first signs that something is not okay in your house, or specifically in your bedroom. The 3 o'clock in the morning issue comes up because the intensity of geopathic stress is not constant over the day period, over the 24 hours. It's more like a sine wave. And so the highest tip of the wave is between 2 and 3 in the morning, and the lower part of the wave is in the afternoon. So that is to be considered also when I come in the middle of the day to do a consultation somewhere. The intensity numbers we get there are much lower than they might be in the early morning hours. And so what happens is that we charge up with geopathic stress. So we carry this charge on us and slowly discharge over a number of days then, except if we recharge every night. But we keep this charge on us. And so when we test somebody with a quantum biofeedback computer, the computer says geopathic stress detected on the person, because it figures out this subtle charge on the body, and so you charge up all night, and then it hits a threshold at some point, and this is practically at the tip or the end of the maximum there at 3 o'clock or 3:30. A lot of people wake up. And as soon as you bring this up, when I find something in somebody's bed, they immediately come up and say, yeah, my husband always wakes up at 3, or I wake up and I can't get back to sleep, and I really do sleep, don't sleep well. And then here, that's another little sidetrack. So I sidetrack you a lot, you might have noticed, is that sleep is a very important phase for self-healing for the body, because healing does not happen in a magical way. Really, the body heals itself if you provide the environment, or maybe some supplements or food or whatever. The body heals itself, as much as it can. If the interruption is not too bad or overwhelming. And so what happens is at night, the body goes into a deep phase where the parasympathetic, during the day you have the activity, sympathetic system, fight and flight mode, whatever you do. And at night you go into parasympathetic, and this is where healing happens, if there is a good, quiet, supportive environment. So if you have a stressful environment, because this is what happens during the day, right? You're exposed to stress, and stress makes you fight and flight, right? So now we have a similar energy at night all the time, which does not allow the body to go into this calm, restful, self-healing thing, because the body is stressed out. It's just a different form of stress. It's geopathic stress, means it comes from an earth energy situation, and it is to some degree draining or harmful, but it's another form of stress. So what happens now is that you never get into the self-healing. The self-healing part, or the resting part at night, refills your piggy bank as well. Every night you get a little bit back, and during the day you spend something because you're stressed out and run around and do whatever needs to be done. So if this does not happen, so the refill does not happen, but the takeout does happen, which means your account empties out even faster. And so this is why the sleeping part is important. And the 3-away call in the morning is a strong signal, or a strong, one of those many signs. Not everybody has a cat. Of the strong signs that something is wrong. And with little kids, for example, babies respond very naturally to geopathic stress. So they roll out of their bed, and I found some funny pictures recently on the internet where a baby, the parents put already a blanket on the side of the bed and on the ground, and you see the baby hanging out, half just one leg on the bed and the upper body is down on the ground, because they know already every night the baby rolls out of the bed. They just think it's restlessness or it's funny somehow. It is not. The baby has these original instincts to move away from that, to roll away from that. Once you get older, you lose that, and you just take it, and you store it in your system. But except of that, some people are very sensitive and they feel that, but otherwise, it's not happening anymore. But my dad, I told a story once. My dad was so sensitive at the end of his life. When he sat down somewhere, he could feel that there was an underground water stream there. So he felt it in his hip bones, right? Because the joints get sensitive when you get older. And he had to sit, on another chair or somewhere. This doesn't mean that you can't sit anywhere in your house and you have to, make yourself crazy around that. It is really not, because it is part of nature. It is the amount which you spend on there. So if you sit on a table to have dinner, and nobody cares for half an hour, right, to sit there. But if you sleep 8 hours in one spot, every night, which is a third of our life, that is definitely not a healthy place to be. That's the story about 3 o'clock.
Well, how does electromagnetic field, how does that play out? I suppose you don't have geopathic stress, but I've heard there was a film done some years ago, I believe it was called Take Back Your Power, where he did some research into cellular phone towers and how students in this one particular dorm room at one college kept getting cancer, and there was a cell tower located right outside of there. How does microwave and EMF radiation play into that?
Yeah, that is a very important topic in modern times. The whole Wi-Fi, high frequency, gigahertz, microwave topic is a man-made chaotic frequency, and has to some degree similar effects on our body than geopathic stress. Geopathic stress drains and stresses out our cells, so at some point they don't function normally anymore. And EMFs do the same. The difference is a little bit in the distribution of it. So if you have a cell phone or any technical device, the strongest radiation is very close to it. So the distance is your friend. So the further away, the intensity is reduced exponentially. Again with the square of the distance. So double distance, a half of the energy. 3 times the distance, double distance, a fourth of the energy with the square of the distance. I said 3 times further away, a ninth of the energy field. So the energy field takes off quite a lot. But again, it depends on how strong the signal is, the antenna signal is to start with, right? On a cell phone, it's not very strong, but if you keep it on your head, it is, and if you read the small print of any carrier, like the biggest carrier in the country, I found, because I was looking for it, when you sign your contract, in the small print, it says, keep at all times the phone at least half an inch or 3/4 of an inch away from your body. And why would they write this in? You also sign that you agree to never hold the company accountable for any health issues you might get out of that. So why would they make you sign that if there is no problem with all that stuff? So with those devices, you don't want to keep them close on your body. With an antenna, as you mentioned earlier, like a cell phone antenna, the bigger the tower, the stronger the signal. And as you can imagine now, because they want to send out the signal over miles and miles of distances, and the intensity goes off significantly, they have to blast the signal with really strong power. So if you are unlucky enough to have a cell tower close to you, that is not such a great location then, and there are more people now who fight that, who get aware of that. And this is a big field, from smart meters, for example. A lot of people in Maine here fought smart meters, and so these are the electrical meters outside the house, which measure your use of electricity. And they, over the past 5 years, maybe even a little more, they all got turned into so-called smart meters. So nobody has to come by anymore and read the meter once a month or once every 2 months. It's automatically has a Wi-Fi router in there which sends the data to the company, but which means it's another Wi-Fi signal field in your house. And in addition, it's connected to all the electricity outlets, because they're all the power lines in the house become to some degree antennas, if you superimpose a high frequency signal with that. So it's just getting everywhere. And just imagine your own Wi-Fi router in the house, and then you live in a more urban, dense environment. My daughter lives in New York now, and she opens her computer and she doesn't have 3 or 4 internet networks on her list, of network options. She has 100 there. That is insane. That is insane. So this is just the world we live in. When my older son went to college, he called me after a while and said, "Dad, I can't sleep. It's I don't know what it is. I can't sleep." So that he shared the room with another colleague, in his first year. So there were several cell phones, iPads, computers, I think a TV, all these electronics, a video game board, something, in one tiny room. And then there were metal frames for the beds. Metal reflects these energies on top of it. Metal reflects also geopathic stress. So we put some of the devices out there, and it was fine. But that's just, you can't tell kids anymore not to have a computer, unfortunately. I kept cell phones away from my kids when they grew up till they were middle teenagers. But with the last one, it was harder and harder. And now he's 17 himself. So everybody lives, communicates, does everything on their phones. So that's the world there is. Just again, use common sense. If you know that the field is much weaker when you create some distance, use speakerphone as often as you can. Don't sleep with, that's what my son told me, they sleep with the phone under the pillow, so it's on vibrate. So if somebody sends a message, it vibrates, right? So they hear they got a new message. That is very, very harmful. And we will find out about those habits maybe in 10 to 20 years, because there are very, very few studies on the effect and dangers of cell phone technologies and microwave technologies. Very strangely, because any other product has to be tested and needs to get FDA approval. Obviously not in this field. So we will find out, once we have a whole generation which grew up with these devices, how much damage there might have been done. Unfortunately, it is pretty late then in order to reverse that. But yeah, that's just how it is. And there are many additional stories. So if we look at microwaves, microwave ovens heat up food because they send in a high gigahertz frequency vibration to make the molecules vibrate, and this vibration of the molecules leads to friction, and the friction turns into heat. The water molecules start to shake on a very atomic level, and this friction turns into heat. However, what happens when those structures start to vibrate, a lot of the natural bonds get broken, and there's a big damage done. So if you drink or eat anything out of a microwave, it has no nutritional value, zero. So I want to be very clear on that. If you spend money on expensive organic food and then you heat it up in your microwave, it's totally thrown out money. And then if we know that the frequency of a microwave oven, a little bit over 2 gigahertz, is practically the same than that of a cell phone, you understand that a cell phone is a mini microwave oven. It's just not as powerful. So instead of maybe 30 seconds to ruin the water, it takes 10 minutes, but if you carry your phone and your water bottle in the same handbag when you go to work, or throw them on the car seat next to you when you drive to work, your water is microwaved afterwards. And now the body has to deal with it. Now it's on the minus list, because before we learned it's important to hydrate and it's important to drink enough water during the day. But what we could show in a research we did a while ago with live blood microscopy is that as soon as you drink microwaved water, like one sip of it, your blood clumps into these big chains of blood cells. They're called rouleau formations. They look like a roll of money where the blood cells stick together side to side. And when you have these long sticking chains there, it is very hard for the body to squeeze them through the system. And so the blood flow slows down, the oxidation slows down. So now your thinking slows down, your brain doesn't get enough oxygen, right? So now you get tired, you think, oh, I need more coffee, right, to wake me up. So we showed that coffee does the same, not as bad as microwave, but it does the same. And we tested, believe me, because we like coffee, right? Illy coffee, Italian coffee. It does the same. Organic, self-made coffee in any variation immediately sticks blood cells together. So that is, just the same effect then with your cell phone than you have with your microwave oven, leading to health issues in the long term. And let me just add one more thing, because it's just the latest, right? You have heard of the 5G network, right? So everybody's excited. We have 4G now, finally after 3G, 4G. And now the last summer, Congress signed up for 5G. That's the next generation of frequency spans they use. And the first companies already offer test runs with 5G networks. 5G is a 10 times smaller wavelengths than 4G. So instead of working in the 2 gigahertz range, we work in the 20 to 25 gigahertz range. And so the higher the number here, the smaller the wavelength. So if the wavelength is 1/10, you have better reception, because the smaller the wavelength is, reaches better into back rooms of a building, or into, when you have skyscrapers, into every little part there. However, it also is more damaging, because the smaller the wavelengths, at some point you reach X-ray wavelengths, which are still smaller, but the smaller the wavelengths gets, the more it becomes the size of maybe cells in the body, and the more damage it's. Nobody knows anything about health investigation, tests, studies, what 5G would do, on top of the 4G. Nobody knows, but we get the networks already. So that's just the world we live in. So now enough of the scare, right?
Now I know part of the work that you do, you've actually built a custom line of technology and devices and so on. Can you talk about that a little bit and how you came up with the designs and how they actually work to mitigate for these geopathic as well as electromagnetic?
Sure, sure. And this is where the passion and interest comes in, because now what we do is we stretch, the scientific world beyond their limits, right? And a lot of your listeners are familiar with those. And this is what people like Tesla did. And, they used strange energy and lit up buildings without using any normal sources, free energy or so when we look, we know geopathic stress is obviously something which is not helping, not on the positive side of the balance sheet. Then we would like to find out, where does it come from? So this is a lot of research which has been done in Germany, because people were interested obviously for a long time on that. And I worked with people there who, one of them was a medical doctor and other researchers who, some of them could see these fields or field grid lines, grid structures, which are all over the landscape. They're just not, they cannot be sensed with our usual five senses, right? So if somebody is clairvoyant or is more sensitive to that, they can get a glimpse and an idea where those are. And so the research was, where are they coming from? So there are three causes we look for geopathic stress. That's what I wanted to mention earlier. One of them is underground running water, moving water. The second one is fault lines. Earth fault lines, cracks in the ground. Much more happening on the West Coast than here on the East Coast, but it happens. And the third one are specific cubic grid systems, right? And some of them have names from German doctors, because, a lot of them did the research. Hartmann, Dr. Ernst Hartmann, Dr. Manfred Curry, who was an American doctor living in Germany, in Munich. So there's a Hartmann grid, a Curry grid, a Benker grid. So these are different grid systems, big grid systems, which sometimes run through your house. And sometimes they're crossover with natural water flows. But what happens in those, right? What are their structures? And the explanation which came up there was that these are matrix systems which have interfaces in them to higher dimensional energies. And these interfaces, some of them are lenses, as they were described, of a size like this maybe. And they open up, or they're activated sometimes under specific circumstances. For example, there's a specific one which gets activated when the moon is really full. So they're called moon stripes, right? So there's many like those structures in nature. And what the idea was then was, can we influence those in order to either keep them shut, not open them up, or block them out, or put a field around, which does not let them be activated. And so this is what our tools do. So our tools, for example, one for the house, you put on a wall, and it calibrates to the orientation of the house foundation. So when you put a foundation in a house, you change the natural structure of the house a little bit. If there is a small angular difference between a line on the ground and then you put the house foundation in a slight angle, the line snapped parallel to the house, which makes it easier to follow them through the house because they go straight through the house. If the angle is too big, then it doesn't happen anymore. Then they go diagonal through the house. And so what our devices do, they build a microgrid, an energetic grid of about 1/4 of an inch within the house energy field, which neutralizes those interfaces, those energy interfaces, so they don't open up and there is no geopathic stress there. They work very well. We are in the 5th generation now. We had a long time, we had a bit struggling with water because water changes its flow, its intensity. It's stronger in spring than it is in summer. It changes with the moon. But now it's the house shields are very effective. And then, one piece gives the next, because then people said, okay, but what if I walk around? So we had something to carry on your body, and the neatest way to do that was in form of a pendant. So you don't have to carry this as a pendant if you want. I usually have mine in a shirt pocket, just anywhere close to your body, and it seals off the first etheric layer around the body. We work with many energy workers together in order to get different views and perspectives and ideas about what they see and feel, how this affects the body. It is, it's not, there is no instrument, simple instrument to just measure that. If there was, it would be great. So there are some very, very subtle instruments, but because it's so subtle, it is difficult to put it into numbers. But these quantum biofeedback machines, some of them are called after a German professor, Feng machines, where you take a copper grip and it's connected, and then it sends micro electrical signals through the body, and it's put on different acupuncture points on your system. So these are some methods which we could use to figure out what is going on and how to put somebody back in balance. But the devices, the idea of the device was, in general, to create devices was that to give somebody a quick tool to counteract that. There is always a discussion, if I am in meditation and in full alignment, do I need anything like that? You don't, right? So if you are in a really good state and in a good balanced state, you create a strong body field, or you know how to do that, to strengthen that. You can counteract those things. And some people are more natural in that and more talented, and others are not. But if I tell my kids, it's not good to be on your phone, they know that. They, use speakerphone and methods like that, and keep at least a foot or 2 feet. When you arrive at a place, take it out of your pants, of your pockets, put it on the table, put it away from you. They know all those things, and I believe they understand enough of the work we do that they follow that. But still, it's their life. They are on the phone a lot. So what do I give them in addition to counteract the effect and strengthen the effect? The small piece we put on phones, it's a very thin 24-karat gold foil material, is programmed in a specific way that it acts as an artificial interdimensional interface again. And we have people, these people who can work with energies, see energies, feel energies. They tell us that I don't see those things really. but they tell us, I have to work with my dowsing instrument and work with that. But they see that the field which comes out of the phone is practically sucked into the device, and then like in a black hole, and boom, and it's pulled away from your body. You know, and I very much know and understand that this, from a scientific perspective, sounds very strange and beyond the usual. But this is where we are moving and where we are going. You know, energy medicine is the future, not chemical medicine. So we have to learn how to strengthen our energy fields. We have to learn to find out weaknesses in our fields and then work on them, you know, with all kind of methods. And we have to find ways to protect our fields as much as possible. And I don't think we need to explain that we are surrounded by fields in many layers. I mean, I think your listeners are aware of that, right?
For those people who may not understand the principle of how that's working, because if you're saying you have this device that's programmed to pull the energy of the cell phone back into itself, then how is it that the cell phone is still able to transmit and receive data from the cell phone tower and communicate normally?
Right. There is a difference between different layers of frequencies and energies. We just have one word for energy. If I talk energy in my old field, everybody means electricity, right? In the field where I'm working now, if I say energy, everybody means body field or the energetic field around the body. But there are many layers of that. You know, we talk at the moment about 12 dimensions at least, and you know, now we talk about a 13th dimension on top of that. So this is a multidimensional world. The world is multidimensional. So geopathic energies usually come in from a fifth dimension, maybe fifth to sixth dimension. You know, and there's a link where it comes into our physical. Physically, we talk about 3 dimensions, right? So these are the physical dimensions, but there is a world beyond that. And so the world does not end at your body outline, right? It goes beyond that. And, you know, there is a heart field, we heard of that, and brain connection. You know, you can connect with somebody on the other side of the world in a glimpse. There is no time, you know, space and time all loses all those limitations there. When we talk about a phone, then it has an electrical frequency, an electrical signal with which we can measure with an electrical instrument, right? But then there is chaotic additional fields created by it, and that's separate from that. It's just a further out layer. So we don't take away the original signal. So if you take an instrument, a gigahertz meter, you read the same frequency, but the chaotic system, which makes you cringe after a while, this is gone. So you don't feel unpleasant anymore. You don't feel, you know, you get a headache after a while being on the phone. So this part is taken off, you know, because that is so subtle. You know, this is why we are in this space between the worlds, you know, beyond science, and to some degree we try to hold on to the scientific edge because it can't be measured easily. So the way to measure it is to expose biological systems to it, you know. And there was a fun experiment which was done at a class. No, I forgot. Was it a Canadian school class? No, a European class, middle school class, did an experiment, and they put a phone, they put some seeds out there, you know, like 2 or 3 different buckets of seeds, and they put a cell phone, I believe, or a Wi-Fi router in one, and something else in another one, and then they watered it the same way, and then they took pictures every day or every few days. and they presented this at their science experiment. And the one with the cell phone was totally not growing and crippled and in comparison to the other ones. And so if this is the effect, on plants and on food, and it might not be really great for our body as well. But it's not that simple, it's not, as I said, there is no simple instrument to measure that, and official science, as official medicine, just denies that, denies the existence. There's nothing wrong with it. Limitations are proper, which we set, and nobody has to be concerned about that. And I have story after story. So when you realize how limits are made in the US in comparison to other countries in the world, right? So how the FDA in Europe, whatever the institution is called there, does their testing in comparison to our testing here. So, there are official minimum levels which they say are fine, to expose yourself to, right? And the number if you look this up through different countries, it's dramatically smaller in many countries in the world. In Europe, even in Russia, I forgot the precise numbers, but I'm sure you can look it up on the internet. A tenth, or in Austria, it's 1,000th, or even less than what is the limit in the US. And this comes this way. Okay, so when you do a scientific experiment, and maybe you have some cells in a petri dish, right? And you radiate them with a microwave radiation, and you watch them, and then you increase the intensity of the field, right? And you watch them, and at some point you see that there will be a change in the cells, and they, do whatever they do different, right? And so you take a note and say, oh, at this level, the cells start to respond, right? And so what you do usually is, you put your safety level maybe 100 below that, and that after some experimentation studies will be the industry standard, right? And that's how it's done. In America, there is an additional thought about that. They look at that and say, oh, okay, let's not care too much about what happens. Let's think about when can we be sued, and this is the only clear, proven cause, the only cause, not maybe the only cause, so we can be sued at the end of the line, and this is where we put, and then maybe we go a little bit below that, So it has nothing to do with really a concern about any changes. It's always, the concern about monetary outcome. And, as you know, the industry is one of the most flourishing industries. So, there is no time and no space to be too concerned about, as long as we sell new cell phones every 6 months, every year.
So essentially, these devices and your research, it sounds like it's moving into a new field of maybe multidimensional science. Is that?
Yeah. So what we do is we use higher dimensional structures and access to higher dimensions, because when you pull it out in a higher dimension, higher dimensions are formed in a very different way, and it's like flying through space, with Star Wars, and you just zoom in and whoop, and then you come out in a different world, and it's gone. So that is part of the cell phone technology. The house technology, as I told you, builds up in a new small grid, which affects the existing grids and the other grids. So it works in a different way.
And how do you know how to build these? Obviously, it's using a technological understanding that is not really three-dimensional. So where did you learn this, or how did you?
No, that is an interesting part of the story, right? And that is where, you know, I for a long time I got these ideas in when I woke up, for example, you know, so ideas popped in my head. And for a while, you know, I thought that was interesting, but I didn't really make any connections or correlations where this would come from. And then I learned, I was in Australia and studying with a French teacher and medical doctor about those spaces between being awake and being asleep, you know, and what happens. And so we practiced to stretch the time between awakeness and sleep, you know, when you dive into these deep unconscious fields and when you connect. And some people like to do this when they go to bed, and some people like to do this when they come out of sleep, when they wake. So when I go to bed, I'm just immediately gone. I sleep immediately. So I do this in the morning. And now what I can do really is I wake up and I'm not awake. and I watch myself and I know that I'm still asleep, but I already start thinking, right? And so this is how I connect. And what I found out later was that I connect to very engineering people or beings which are not physical. Okay, so, you know, today we would say some higher dimensional beings. But they were very technical oriented, and I had this picture. What was shown to me at some point was I loved the first astronauts, right, going to the moon. You know, I was a little kid when this happened, and I had this picture there that there is a whole room with, you know, with all the equipment of the, what is it called, the, you know, the ground station, you know, and so there's a whole ground station of people up there, and I'm the clumsy astronaut out there in a big suit who barely can hold a tool, right? And they try to send me, now do this and now do this, you know, and it coming from a complex high-dimensional thinking into a three-dimensional form is quite a transition. And so I learned over the years that this might be part of my path, right? To manifest and create things which are a little bit out of our world and put them into something which affects our world here, you know, because our three-dimensional is the most dense situation and world where finally things have to work if we want to, you know, benefit from them. But the ideas come from somewhere else. And when you listen to Einstein and Tesla and those guys who had all these fantastic ideas, they admitted pretty openly that, you know, they popped in their head and it wasn't their ideas. They just came in from some side, and then they somehow figured out how to get this working. And not that I compare myself with those people, but it is a similar process. And more lately, when I learned out about, you know, your group of people around you, I got more description of that and more detailed description, you know, which groups of beings are working with me. And, you know, there are specific ones which are more physical-oriented Arcturians. They maybe even function as translators from even higher dimensional groups of beings. But it becomes so far distant that that to compress this down into physical form is a process which which is my journey.
Tell me about some of the stories of actual individuals you've worked with in different situations, and how either the devices or the work that you've done has actually changed their situation or health or anything.
There are many cases in very different areas. Let me just bring something up which happened yesterday. A woman called me, I don't even know from where, from far away somewhere. And she told me she had bought one of my house shields 15 years ago, right? So a long time ago. Well, one of my earlier versions of it. And she said, I'm not feeling too great. I don't know what it does really. I remember very much, she said, at the beginning, we noticed a difference. And what she told me was that she had this strange bathroom fan, which always went on and off by itself. And she had the electrician in several times. And he said, there's nothing wrong with your fan. I don't know what you want from me. Everything is fine. And she said, I remembered when we put the shield up, the fan was fine suddenly, right? But I don't remember any of, if we ever even talked about that at that point. And so she said, I don't know what it is, but maybe we want to check. And so we found out, so she took some pictures on the wall, and we found out that they had moved it from the original spot some years ago, and they had put it backwards up, and some other things. It was not at a good spot, so it wasn't really working anymore. But all there was this strange thing with the fan, right? And there is one part of my work, which is another little side part, and I'm usually not talking too much about it because it's again a little bit out of usual science. Which has to do with then when lights start to flicker, and let's say you can't find any electrical causes for that, because sometimes it might just be an electrical cause, that there is some other energy in the house, which we call sometimes ghost type of energy. And so, and I mentioned this to her, and I said, look, I guess maybe this was some ghost story, and I don't know how you think about that. I don't want to, hurt your religious feelings, but that happens sometimes. Or if a house doesn't sell, stories like that. And she said that is, and so she got silent for a bit, and I said, so is it okay? Are you okay? Did we? And she said, you know what? I remember something. A few weeks ago, I talked to my daughter. The daughter is now 22 years old. And the daughter, and so they talked about ghosts, right? And she thought that was interesting that I brought that up. And she said, my daughter was always very scared at night. So she was scared of the darkness. And I often had to go to her bedroom and lie down with her and comfort her to get her to sleep. And when we talked about a few weeks ago with my daughter told me, which she had never told me in her life, she said, Mom, why I was really always so scared in the dark was because sometimes I saw this face of a young girl on my door, and this is what scared me. And her mom said, why did you never tell me that, right? I mean, and she said, no, I don't know, she was maybe 7 years old, I guess, if I do the math. She said, I was embarrassed, and I just thought, I'm scared of the darkness, and you would come anyway. And when they talked back now, she said, you know, when I think back of it, I think at the time when we put the shield up, the face disappeared, you know? And so that is a strange story, right? But if you know that a lot of ghost energies thrive on this very low energy quality, what geopathic stress provides, right? So there are sometimes some specific geopathic grid lines, which we call ghost highways, which connect even graveyards sometimes with other graveyards, you know, and you can check on there. If you go there, you can feel traffic going by, and you know there are all these ghost hunters, and but that is a natural connection. So when you create a shield around the house, you know, and the geopathic stress is gone, you know, maybe it was part of holding the ghost out there, right? So sometimes if it's really stuck to the house, so there are all different ways. You want to do the clearing first and then put the shield up, because the shield itself just blocks things away, but it doesn't take. So, you know, that is like something which we figured out 15 years later now, right? And it had an effect on, you know, on people which scientifically cannot really be explained that well. If you ask me about some more practical example, I'd like to bring up babies, you know, because when babies don't sleep through the night, that is practically always the case, except if they are sick, right? But this is what parents are afraid of, because there are too many choices what could be wrong with the baby if it wakes up screaming, right? So there's either they are hungry, or they need a change, or something is wrong, they're sick, right? But a big option there is always that they are not happy with the spot there and they can't move away. You know, so if they are locked in and they can't just roll out in a different part of the bed, then they just wake up and they are restless and they might cry at night. And so I have many stories like this, and this is why I like them, because we didn't explain it to the baby. We didn't. The baby didn't have to believe in anything. We just changed the energy in the house, and from 1 minute to the next, or from one day to the next, the baby sleeps through the night, right? So we had one specific case in San Francisco, which I remember because we worked on a double house there, and what those shields do is they don't necessarily separate between the units. They work on an entire block. You know, the house is an energy body itself. So the energy field of a house stands out about 15 feet beyond the wall space of the house, right? So at the same time, you see then if you have a close neighbor building, a close neighbor, his energy field stands out, yours stand out. So if you don't have at least 30 feet distance between the houses, those energy fields overlap. And you feel the energy of your neighbor in there. And if you live in a condominium or where several units are stuck together, you have the energy of one neighbor in from this side and from the others this side. And you can feel this if you're sensitive. So what we did there is, it was a double house, and we worked on one side. The people had called us, and I believe the wife had sleeping issues or whatever. And so there was no way to move the bed in a different part. That would be the simplest, you know, to move the bed to a different wall if there's enough space there. But in this case, there wasn't, so we put a shield up. And I checked back the next day, and what we found out was that it was over the weekend. The two fathers met outside in the morning when they picked up the newspaper. So they walked out and said hi to each other. And the neighbor, of the other part of the house said, something weird happened tonight. And so they had a bit of a conversation. He said, they just had moved in 2 or 3 months earlier, and their baby was total restless, cried all night. The parents were pretty desperate. They didn't know what was going on. And they said, our baby slept through the night. I don't know what happened. So the father started to talk, and they learned that we had, done some energy work in the other part of the house. And so I came back in to investigate the second part of the house. And what happened was that there was a grid line which was going the long side through both houses, and the bedrooms were practically mirrored. And so there was the bed was the same than on the other side, but the bed was a little bit put sideways, and because they had a baby, they had the baby crib next to the bed. And this grid line was a bit of a wider one. It was a foot wide, and it just went through the entire crib. And the baby was locked in. It couldn't move anywhere, right? And so it just went through the baby. And the baby immediately noticed, obviously, the difference. And that, I have to tell you, is the most rewarding part. If you can really get such a feedback and make the difference in a person's life, because it takes a number of years till your piggyback gets empty. But once it's empty, you have a whole list of health issues, of chronic stories which come up one after the other. And so to catch this at an early time, not to wait till you're sick, but just to check it early enough, is really the goal here. And to provide this as an information service, to have people learn about that, to look for the signs and symptoms and signals of nature, of your plants, of your pets, if you want so. Watch your cat, watch your dog. Or on the other hand, just observe, where you have trouble. Then people tell me, oh, I don't know, my left shoulder, for years, now I have a hip replacement. And then we look, and then along the whole side, there is an underground water stream on the left side of the bed, and it just, over the years, it weakened their system. And at some point it starts to crack, and then, the shoulder doesn't work anymore, whatever it is. So, look, I have so many stories. I had somebody, usually the women call me in, right? So the men are more reserved. I love it if they are there at the same time, because I try to explain what I'm doing with as much science and logic as I can, right? If there are energy grids, and if they drain you, and if you see those in nature, that obviously doesn't make sense it does make sense to get away from that. It doesn't make sense to stay there. So the wife calls me in, and we check on there. And the main thing which I remember was that there was an energy band on top of their head, crossing the bed, right? And it was on the bed head and reaching in a few inches, maybe like half a foot inch but it was along the bed. And there were pillows on the bed. And so I mentioned this to the wife, but I didn't make a big thing out of it, because these lines are really sharp. So either you're on or you're off. If you get a few inches away, you're off. It doesn't affect you anymore. And so then I say my goodbyes after the whole thing. And on the way out, she leads me out, and she says, I didn't want to say anything in front of my husband, because this was a guy. He was like 7'5" or 6'6", 6'5" or 6. I don't know. He was a tall guy, and she said, I didn't want to say anything in front of him, but a week ago, the dermatologist had taken the skins from the head with they thought it was skin cancer. on top of his head, you know. And then I thought, isn't that crazy? Exactly, because the guy was so tall, you know, so he maxed out the length of the bed, you know, and he reached on really to the board maybe. Well, she didn't, because she was a bit shorter, right? And exactly on top there, this is where they found the cancer, right? And I thought, you know, it's not, for a long time I thought, you know, if it affects you on your body, you get weak in general. But this is not the case. It really affects you exactly where it crosses you over, exactly there. So if it's there, you know, you might have some breast cancer or whatever. If it's there, it might be some digestive stuff. And if it's further down, it might be some knee problems. So, you know, this is what you learn over the years. And another very interesting aspect is, you know, after all, that it might not be the fault of the earthline that you get sick, right? So there is this resonance principle which covers everything, which means that you're attracted by something, and maybe not always what is healthy for you, but you're attracted to it, which is in resonance with your own energy pattern, and vice versa. You know, sometimes people are attracted to food which is not good for them. So I had a case of a very nice gentleman, CEO of a company in Massachusetts, who had really very strong migraines for long times of his life, you know, very, very massive. So he had to go on heavy medication. As soon as it came out, he had to stay out of work for a day. And we looked at the house where they were living, and there was a very rare, specific grid line which was going diagonal through his head, right, in a specific way. And what we did there mainly was we moved, there was enough space, so we moved the bed 2 or 3 feet to the side, to his wife's side on the other side. So he got out of that, right? And, you know, and it slowly got better, and then I didn't hear of him anymore. And then he calls me a year later and he says, Werner, you know, can you come down? We found this beautiful property, but it has to be really fast. We start building already. The builders are there. I always wanted to build my place. And so till our schedules worked together, it was another few weeks. So I came down there. So they had put the foundation in already. You know, and remember what I said before, when you put the foundation in, you change the grids a little bit. So he shows me, but they are locked in then. So he shows me the plan structure, right? And people are working and hammering around us. And so here's the bedroom, and here's the master bed. And I check there, and he finds a spot where this rare grid goes diagonally through his head, you know, which is amazing, because I couldn't have found the spot that precise before the foundation was in, because the foundation changed everything. But he manifested it somehow so he would get his migraines back. So, you know, so it is not the fault of the earthland that you get sick. You know, it's just helping you on the way to stay out of it. But there is a resonance. What does the migraine do for him, right? In terms of pushing him. I very much believe philosophically, and I know this is sometimes difficult to go with if you're really affected, if you have an illness, right? I very much believe the illness is there to make us, to teach us something, to make us grow, you know, to find our way around that. And with some people, you see, you know, they are limited to their wheelchair and their geniuses, right? And they grow beyond that, and these are the heroes. But every illness is a teacher, you know. So, you know, don't know anymore. The migraines are fine now. So, and he did acupuncture and he did all kind of other work with it, but the migraines always came back, right? So it helped him to calm down. It's like an inflammation, to calm down the inflammation, right? But the inflammation always comes back because the environment is set up for that. So we put in another level of protection against that. But there is a weakness, maybe, with what this has to do with him, and that's you can go on a life quest and find out what this is about, and maybe something is karmic and comes down, as we had in our earlier conversation, through your genetic code and through your ancestry code and imprint. And people would say, oh, maybe he had a horrible experience in a past life, and had an accident, or was in a war and got, I don't know, his head got blown away or something, and this is why the migraines show up. But these patterns manifest together, right? And we just provide some part of information on this step between the very subtle step to karmic realms and the very outer realms of our understanding, and the very physical, three-dimensional manifested properties and worlds.
Those are some very interesting stories, and there's a lot more I'd love to speak with you about I'd like to have you back again in the future to delve more into some other subject areas. But can you talk about where, if anyone wants to work with you, where they can find your websites and anywhere where they can get in touch?
Yeah, thank you. Sure. I have several websites with information. I have a website called geopathology.com, which describes more of those different grids and EMFs and what you can do just in practical terms, just to keep the issues here at a minimum. Geopathology.com, geo like in geography, pathology, the study of sickness. And I have an institute of Feng Shui and Geopathology. So if you want more information on the Feng Shui part, you could go to www.instituteoffengshui.com, and Feng Shui spells FENGSHUI. Instituteoffengshui.com, and we are in the process of creating a new platform, maybe to reach out into further energy work, but that is something for the future, and maybe we can announce something like that at some point in the future when we.
Yeah, I'll have you back on in the future. We'll talk about the work that's happening in that particular area, which is very interesting. And we're going to be having you at our expo, speaking at our expo this November in 2017 in Detroit. So looking forward to that as well. But thank you for taking so much time with me today, and I look forward to having you back soon.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Ethan.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Awaken Empowered TV with my special guest, Werner Brandmaier. Join me next week as we speak with another incredible individual who's standing on the leading edge and changing the world.